For the second part of this tutorial, we will now talk about marks and channels. That is, how do we visually encode data? So, remember, last time we talked about this idea that there's a whole array of techniques for how to visualize, and we're specifically going to be focused on this question of visual encoding. So, how could we analyze the structure of one of these idioms, right? Scatter plots, bar charts. We'll start with the simple ones. How can we think about this systematically? Let's start by defining two terms, marks and channels. So marks are geometric primitives that can represent items or nodes or links. So we can think of points as a way to represent them, zero-dimensional, lines, one-dimensional, areas, two-dimensional. We could even think of three-dimensional volumes. So these are geometric primitives that can carry information through what we're going to call visual channels that control their appearance. So there could be spatial position, color, shape, all the kinds of size, orientation or tilt. So there's a number of ways we could use their appearance to somehow convey information. So the key thing is that these channels are not all created equal. The type of information they convey, the amount that they can carry to the human perceptual system is definitely variable, and understanding that is a key part of understanding visual encoding. So now that we have this vocabulary, let's try to walk through and analyze the idiom structure as this combination of marks and channels. Let's start with bar charts. We've got line marks, and the channel we're using is vertical spatial position. What about the scatter plot? Well, we have two attributes of vertical and horizontal position, and we're using point marks to show this. So if we use lines, it wouldn't work because we're trying to use both of these spatial positions at once. So we switch to points. We can keep going. We can add more information by using another visual channel, in this case, color, to actually convey information about a third attribute. And again, we can keep going. We can use size to convey more information about a fourth attribute. So we're actually encoding 4 different things in this last bubble plot where we've got size and color in addition to horizontal and vertical spatial position. Okay, so how do we pick which channel to use? The answer is it's complicated, and people have thought long and hard about this, and there is a lot we know. So for one thing, a key point is expressiveness. Some of these channels have characteristics that need to match up with the data. Specifically, all the ones on the left side are the magnitude channels. These are channels that show how much in a fundamental way to your perceptual system. So they're a good match with ordered attributes, as we've just talked about. So how much is a question we can ask. How far is it along a common scale? How big is this? How much tilt is this? How large is this? How bright is this? How dark is this? How curvy is this? How much curvature is there? So these are all magnitude questions where we want to use a magnitude channel for an ordered attribute. Now over on the right side, what we have are the identity channels. These show, are you a part of something? These are a good match with categorical attributes, like it's the what instead of the how much. What region is this in? What color is this? What motion am I seeing? What shape is this? So that's a good match for categorical. If we have a mismatch, then we have one of two failure modes. We could lose information if we try to show ordered attributes with identity channels. We lose the ability to show that order. Or if we take unordered information, categorical information, and we show it with the magnitude channel, there's going to be something arbitrary there because we are implying order where we don't necessarily have one in the data. So in addition, these are, as I said before, they're not all created equal. I've got a layering here, a ranking, where the best ones are at the top and the less good ones are further down, because these channels really have different abilities to convey information to the human perceptual system. A thing to notice is that spatial position is very high both on the magnitude channels and on the identity channels. So spatial region, position along a common scale or aligned position, those are the most accurate and effectively perceived ones. And then things go down from there. So effectiveness is something we can think about. Now, you might ask, how do we know? What data do we have underlying this judgment of effectiveness? There's been a lot of work in what's called psychophysics, the measurement of how humans respond to perceptual stimuli, over many, many decades, starting at the beginning of the 20th century. And over time, Stevens developed this idea of a power law, that our response to sensory phenomena is in a power law, and the exponent depends on the sensory modality. A thing to notice in this diagram is that length has linear response. The exponent is 1, right? So this linear response is something where we get a very accurate perception of length, but that's not true for the other modalities. Notice how some of these are compressed, area and three-dimensional depth into the scene and brightness. If you double the stimulus, you do not have double the perceptual response. You get a compressed thing, and also the opposite's true. You can have magnified stimuli, where electric shock, tingles in the fingertips, you actually perceive, if you double the stimulus, it feels like it's more than doubled. So this is some fundamental psychophysical work that informs these rankings. But there's also more. There's been a lot of experiments, starting with some very influential early work from Cleveland and McGill in the 80s, who actually did measure people's response to different kinds of visual encodings, and then checked how much error was there in their ability to accurately decode what was trying to be encoded through these visualizations. And what's actually being shown here is their original results of errors, and then a crowdsourced replication using Mechanical Turk in 2010 from Hare and Bostock, and they aligned quite well. And the key thing to notice is, again, spatial position is at the top, and then things like angles and areas are beneath that. So our ability to perceive accurately depends on the channel. Accuracy is not the only thing. Another one is discriminability. How many usable steps, how many levels of a categorical attribute can we convey with a particular channel? And in some cases, we can convey many, many levels, and in other cases, we can convey few. That's not a problem per se, but we have to make sure that it's matching well. We have to make sure that we have enough ability to discriminate in the channel to convey the information in the attribute. So for example, you can't just keep cranking up line width indefinitely. At some point, you can make lines wider and wider, and it's very effective. It's very easy to see what's going on in this graph of telecommunications bandwidth between the European countries. But if you make a line too wide, it no longer looks like a line. It starts to look like an area, a polygon. So there's a limit as to the number of usable bins, of discriminable bins for line width. And that's actually true for many other channels as well. And we'll particularly talk more about position and color in this tutorial. That's not the only consideration. We also have to worry about whether visual channels step on each other's toes. So in some cases, we have completely separable responses to these channels. Let's start by looking over on the left side, where we have two groups of two, and we can really check either one. We can look at the left side and the right side of dots, or we can look at the blue dots and the orange dots, and we can separately attend to either one we like. So this is the good case. This is the fully separable case. Now, in some cases, we have a little bit of interference between them, because what you might notice is it's much easier to tell apart the color for the big dots than for the little dots. What's going on there? Size interferes with our ability to perceive color. So there's some interference, but we can still tell there's big and little, and there's purple and blue. Things get a little trickier with this third case, where we're trying to width code and height code. But we don't see that same thing where we could see these two groups of two. The problem is what we see is little things, big things, and squished things, whether they're squished this way or that way. So we're really seeing three groups, not these 2 and 2. So there's some really significant differences here. And then in this final case, over on the right side, we've got something terrible. I've actually encoded exactly a low and a high amount of red and a low and a high amount of green. However, that's not what you see. You see 4 different possible colors because your visual system automatically integrates those things together into a perception of color in a way that you can't really undo. So we don't have 2 and 2 anymore. We have 4 groups. These are integral percepts. So integrality versus separability is something you have to consider carefully. These channels have a lot of crosstalk and interference, and you have to choose carefully to make sure that the message you're trying to convey can actually get through your retina into your brain to convey information to a human. Another phenomenon to think about is also visual pop-out. So let's try an experiment. We're doing this by video, so I'm gonna be the proxy for you, but I'd love for you to actually go along, and I'm going to show you pictures, and when you see the red dot, I want you to say out loud, got it, which is also what I'm gonna do. So I'll give count of 3. 3, 2, 1, got it? Okay, I saw a red dot. There's a bunch of blue dots. I'm gonna try it again. 3, 2, 1, got it? Okay, let's try it again. Looking for the red dot. 3, 2, 1, got it? Aha, now it's not red versus blue, it's dot versus squares. So I did find the red dot. Again, 3, 2, 1, got it? Okay, also found my red dot. All right, one more round. We're gonna do, again, look for the red dot. 3, 2, 1, got it? All right, our last one. 3, 2, 1, got it? So what happened there? That last one took a lot longer. So, you know, clearly what I've got is the left column has few, what I'll call distractors, and the right column has lots. But I managed to do a good job of finding the red dot, whether there was a small or large number of distractors for the first 2 rows. And that's because the human brain does some amazing parallel processing of these visual signals, where you can actually find a red dot, even if there's 10 blue dots or 100 blue dots or 1,000 blue dots, you can find the red dot remarkably quickly. Your speed is pretty much independent of the number of distractors. But it took me a lot longer for that last row. And that's because I was looking for a red dot amid red and blue dots and squares. And this combination was something I actually had to go and check each one. It would take me a lot longer if there were 1,000 distractors instead of 100 here. So you can't just, even though pop-out's a pretty amazing phenomenon and powerful, you can't just do it for all the channels at once, sadly enough. So there's a very small number of even 2-way combinations, and most 2-way and all 3-way or n-way combinations are not going to work for pop-out. So it's a phenomenon you can harness, but perhaps not as much as you might initially think. And it's not just shape and color, it's all kinds of things. It's orientation, it's size, it's density, it's even exotic things like shadow direction. So a lot of these we're getting pop-out for. I will point out that it's not everything. In fact, this example of are the lines parallel or tilted, in fact, we don't get parallel processing for that. So we don't have these sort of visual pop-out effects on absolutely every possible channel, although it's many, many of them. Finally, let's talk a little bit about what happens if your mark is trying to actually in some ways show a flavor of grouping. So we've been sort of thinking about the marks as items, but remember the case of networks where we could have both nodes and links. We want to specifically think about marks as showing linkage. And there's 2 main ways to do that. There's containment, where you've got some sort of enclosing thing. So it seems pretty clear that those 3 orange dots inside the gray L are somehow a group contained within. And there's also connection, where we've actually taken these dots and connected them up in a V, where we've actually got a line segment between. So containment and connection are both ways to show links through marks. And it's worth thinking about, how do you show that things are together as part of a group? And the key thing is that these identity channels, we can say that if we've got the same value in the identity channels, things appear to be a group. A crucial one is proximity. If things are in the same spatial region, that is the strongest cue that tells us that we treat them as a group. It's a very, very strong cue. We'll talk more about that as we go. And it's also true that if we have the same value, for example, you could say everything that's colored red or everything that's a dot versus a square, those are also going to be perceived as a group. So, and this is something that you're not doing cognitively, this is something you're doing perceptually, that your perceptual system is doing in a way that's under the hood and automatic, that doesn't require conscious attention. All right, so we've gotten to the end of this section. Again, we've got some further reading, and this is a great time to think about questions. See you in the next segment.